The Dyatlov Pass incident. It's a name that makes people stop and think. It's a story that just doesn't make sense, even after all these years. 9 hikers went into the Ural Mountains in 1959 and never came back. When rescuers found them, what they saw started a mystery that still haunts us. And there are so many theories about what happened. Some say it was an avalanche. Some point to a wild animal attack. Others whisper about something supernatural like a yeti. But one theory just keeps coming back, and it's a dark one. It says the hikers stumbled onto something the Soviet military wanted to keep hidden. It says they died because of a secret weapon test and the government covered it all up. This idea, the secret weapon test theory, is a heavy one, but it makes a lot of the strange facts seem to fit. Let's look at why people believe this and what it might mean. The story starts in January 1959. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student, led a group of 8 other experienced hikers. They were all young, fit, and skilled. Their goal was a challenging winter trek to Mount Otorten in the northern Urals. This was serious hiking, it needed tough people, and they were tough. They set off full of hope and excitement. They sent postcards home, they took photos, their journey was well documented, at least at first. The group was supposed to send a telegram when they got back to the village of Vizhai by February 12th, but no telegram came. Days passed. People started to worry. A search party was put together made up of volunteers, students, and eventually the military. What they found on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, also known as Dead Mountain, shocked everyone. It wasn't just that the hikers were dead. It was how they were found. On February 26th, the searchers found the group's tent. It was set up on the side of the mountain, but it was torn open from the inside. Not ripped from an animal outside, cut. As if someone inside needed to get out in a hurry. Their gear, their warm clothes, their food, it was all still inside. A trail of footprints led away from the tent. So they weren't just the footprints of a panicked dash, some people were barefoot. Others wore only socks. They walked towards the forest edge about a mile away down the slope. The weather was brutal. Sub-zero temperatures, wind. This made no sense. Why would experienced hikers leave their shelter and warm clothes in such conditions? Near the edge of the forest, under a large cedar tree, the first 2 bodies were found. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were dressed in very little. Some reports say they had burns on their hands and feet. A small fire had been made near them, but it was just embers. The branches of the cedar tree were broken, as if someone had tried to climb it, or perhaps had tried to look for something. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar tree and the tent. Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They were spread out as if they were trying to get back to the tent, or maybe had fallen trying. Dyatlov was found clutching a tree branch. Slobodin had a fractured skull, but not a huge external wound. Kolmogorova had bruises and a cut, but nothing immediately fatal. The search continued for weeks. It was a huge, difficult effort in the harsh mountain condition. Finally, in May, when the snow started to melt, the last 4 bodies were found. They were in a ravine about 75 meters deeper into the forest past the cedar tree. Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles. And these 4 were the most disturbing. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had incredible injuries. Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, and parts of her face. Zolotaryov had massive chest fractures. Thibault-Brignoles had a severe skull fracture. Kolevatov had a deformed skull. These weren't injuries from simply falling. These were internal, crushing injuries. Yet, there were often no external marks, no broken skin, no obvious signs of a struggle. It was as if something had squeezed or hit them with immense force from the inside out. And then there was the clothing. Some of the hikers were wearing each other's clothes. Dubinina was wearing Zolotaryov's trousers and hat. Some clothing was radioactive. Yes, radioactive. Not all of it, but enough to make people ask serious questions. Their skin, when described, sometimes had an odd orange or brownish color. Some of their hair was gray, despite their young age. The official conclusion, after a quick investigation, was a compelling natural force. The case was closed. The files were sealed. Family members were told little. The area was declared off-limits for years, and this is where the seeds of suspicion truly began to grow. Why such a vague conclusion? Why the secrecy? Why close a case so quickly when so many questions remained? The behavior of the authorities immediately raised eyebrows. They seemed to dismiss strange details and push for a simple explanation, even when the facts screamed otherwise. The compelling natural force felt like a convenient way to avoid saying what they really thought, or what they knew. And then there were the other reports. Other groups of hikers in the region, even some local Mansi people, spoke of strange glowing spheres or bright lights in the sky on the night of the incident or around that time. These were not just one-off stories. Several different people reported seeing these phenomena. These weren't little flashes. These were large, unmoving, glowing lights. What were they? Were they related? The official investigation ignored these reports. The radiation findings were also brushed aside. How does clothing become radioactive in a remote part of the Urals? The explanation was vague. Maybe it was left near radioactive material during work, or maybe it was just a natural occurrence. But it was never properly investigated. And the types of injuries, internal, crushing trauma without external wounds, these are not typical of an avalanche. An avalanche would leave broken bones, contusions, and debris. It would likely have crushed the tent. The tent was still standing, just cut open, and there was no large pile of snow, no debris field that would point to an avalanche. The paradoxical undressing, where hypothermia victims remove their clothes, is real. But it usually happens after a long period of exposure, not minutes after fleeing a tent. And it doesn't explain the broken bones or internal injuries. Why run into such cold without shoes and leave everything behind? It just didn't add up. Something truly terrifying must have made them leave their tent like that. Something that made them run, even without clothes, into the deadly cold. This is where the secret weapon test theory steps in. It tries to tie all these loose ends together. The core idea is simple. The hikers stumbled into a zone where the Soviet military was testing a new secret weapon. Maybe they saw something they shouldn't have seen, or maybe they were simply victims of an unforeseen accident during a test. Think about the time 1959. The Cold War was in full swing. The Soviet Union and the United States were locked in an intense arms race. Both sides were developing all sorts of terrifying new weapons. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, new types of bombs, missile technology. Secrecy was paramount. The military wouldn't bat an eye at testing experimental weapons in remote areas, far from prying eyes. And if things went wrong, if civilians died, a cover-up would be absolutely expected. It wasn't about individual lives, it was about national security and keeping technological advantages secret. So, what kind of weapon could have caused these strange deaths? One popular idea is some kind of infrasound weapon. Infrasound is sound below the human hearing range, but at high intensity it can have serious physical effects. It can cause extreme fear, panic, disorientation, nausea, and even internal organ damage. Imagine a sudden, powerful burst of infrasound hitting the tent. The hikers would have been overwhelmed by an unexplainable primal terror. They would have panicked. They might have thought they were under attack. This could explain the frantic cutting of the tent from the inside. They needed to get out now, without thinking. They ran, perhaps disoriented, not knowing where they were going. An infrasound wave could also explain the internal injuries. A strong pressure wave, even if invisible, could cause the kind of crushing chest and skull fractures seen in Dubinina, Zolotaryov, and Thibaut Brignoles. And it could disrupt their internal organs without leaving external marks. It fits the compelling natural force perfectly because it is a natural force, just artificially amplified and weaponized. And it would leave no physical evidence on the ground, no bullet casings, no bomb fragments, nothing a search party would find easily. Another theory points to a vacuum bomb or a similar type of thermobaric weapon. These bombs work by first dispersing a fuel cloud, then igniting it. The explosion consumes all the oxygen in the area, creating a massive overpressure wave followed by a vacuum effect. This could cause the kind of internal crushing injuries without external wounds. The sudden pressure changes could also disorient and panic people. It could even explain some of the burns. However, a vacuum bomb is a powerful device, and it's hard to imagine it leaving the tent relatively intact, though perhaps the hikers were outside the immediate blast zone. And then there's the idea of a small tactical nuclear device, or a dirty bomb. This one could easily explain the radiation found on the clothing. Even a very small nuclear device, or an experimental one, could cause the injuries. The blast would be immense, but if the hikers were on the periphery, or if it was a weapon designed to create internal damage with less outward force, it might fit. The orange skin and gray hair could also be symptoms of radiation sickness. The Manzi reports of strange lights could be the flash of such a device, or perhaps a precursor missile launch. Speaking of missile tests, this is another strong contender. The Dyatlov Pass area was not that far from known Soviet missile ranges. What if a test went wrong? What if a missile or a rocket carrying some experimental payload malfunctioned and exploded in the air, or even impacted near the hikers? The bright glowing spheres reported by others could have been missile tests, or even a rocket breaking up in the atmosphere. The impact or explosion could create an air blast, a shock wave that travels through the ground and air. This shockwave could easily cause the internal injuries, the fractures, the disorientation. The radiation could come from the rocket fuel or an experimental payload. An unexpected blast would make the hikers flee in terror. It could also make them confused and disoriented, leading to the erratic behavior and undressing. The cover-up part of this theory is crucial. If any of these scenarios happen, the Soviet government would have every reason to hide it. This was a time of extreme paranoia and competition, too. Avoiding international scandal. If it became known that Soviet weapon tests were killing their own citizens, it would be a huge propaganda blow. Admitting a mistake of this magnitude would undermine authority. So, the immediate closure of the case, the vague, compelling natural force explanation, the sealing of files, the apparent dismissal of strange eyewitness accounts, all of these actions align perfectly with a military cover-up. Investigators might have been pressured, or even threatened, to stick to the official narrative. Any evidence pointing to military involvement would have been quickly removed or reclassified. The relocation of the Mansi people who knew the area and saw strange things could also be part of this effort to control the narrative and remove witnesses. When you look at the evidence through this lens, many things start to make more sense. The radiation on the clothes, peculiar internal injuries with little external trauma, the sudden desperate flight from the tent, the strange lights in the sky, the secretive behavior of the authorities. All of these points, which individually challenge the natural disaster theories, could be explained by an experimental weapon test gone wrong and the subsequent cover-up. But of course this is a theory, and it has its own critics and counter-arguments. No smoking gun has ever been found, no weapon debris, no official confession. Decades have passed. The original investigators are gone. The files that might have held answers are likely destroyed or still deeply buried. One of the main arguments against the military theory is the simple lack of direct, undeniable proof. We have circumstantial evidence, intriguing correlations, but no concrete evidence like weapon fragments or leaked documents. Without that, it remains speculation, however compelling. Another common counter-argument is the revived avalanche theory. This theory suggests that a slab avalanche, a type of slow-moving snowslide, could have caused the initial panic and injuries. The sound of the snow shifting could have startled them, prompting them to cut the tent. The pressure from the snow could have caused some of the internal injuries, especially if they were buried for a short time. Subsequent hypothermia would explain the undressing and eventual deaths. However, the avalanche theory still struggles with several points. The terrain at Dyatlov Pass wasn't considered steep enough for a typical avalanche. The tent was still standing, not buried or swept away. There was no large snow accumulation, no clear debris field. And it doesn't explain the radiation, the specific types of crushing injuries without external bruising that a snow impact would cause, or the strange lights in the sky. While an avalanche might account for some elements, it doesn't quite fit all the bizarre facts. Other, less popular theories like an animal attack quickly fall apart when faced with the sheer scale of the injuries and the lack of animal signs. A bear or wolf would leave clear tooth and claw marks, and they wouldn't cause internal organ damage without breaking skin. They also wouldn't leave clothing radioactive, or cause people to undress themselves. A more recent natural explanation involves infrasound generated by wind patterns. This theory suggests that specific wind conditions, interacting with the unique topography of Kolotsiakl, could have generated natural infrasound waves strong enough to induce panic and disorientation. This could explain the flight from the tent and the mental state, but again, it falls short on the physical injuries and the radiation. It doesn't explain why these hikers, on this night, were affected so severely, when presumably similar wind conditions would have occurred before and after. And then there's the question of sloppiness. Would the Soviet military, known for its meticulous secrecy, be so careless as to test a weapon in an area where hikers were known to be? Or, if it was an accident, why was the cleanup not more thorough? Why leave radioactive clothing? Perhaps it was an unexpected malfunction. Perhaps the test was meant to be further away. Or perhaps the secrecy was so paramount that even a sloppy cover-up was preferable to admitting the truth. It was the Soviet Union, after all. The lives of a few hikers might not have mattered much in the grand scheme of Cold War power plays. Consider the context of the Cold War. It was a time when human life was often secondary to national objectives. The Soviet Union pushed boundaries in science and warfare, often with little regard for the risks to individuals. Entire towns were exposed to radiation from nuclear tests. Chemical weapons were developed and stored. Mistakes and accidents were covered up as a matter of routine. The Dyatlov Pass incident happening in this environment makes a military cover-up not just plausible, but almost tragically logical. The remoteness of the region would make it an ideal location for covert testing. It's far from major cities, difficult to access, and sparsely populated. If something went wrong, the chances of it being discovered were minimal. The Dyatlov's group, by pure bad luck, might have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They might have set up their camp directly in an impact zone, a blast radius, or a test area that was supposed to be clear. The persistent anomalies are what keep this theory alive. Every other explanation seems to leave gaping holes. An avalanche doesn't explain the cuts in the tent, the specific injuries, the radiation, or the eyewitness accounts of strange lights. Animal attacks are even less likely. The compelling natural force leaves too much to the imagination. The military cover-up theory, however, provides a framework that, while speculative, can encompass most of the disturbing facts. It offers a single, dark explanation for the chaos, the injuries, the panic, the secrecy, and the lingering questions. Proving it after so many years is probably impossible. Evidence is lost, memories fade, official documents are still sealed or destroyed. But the fact that the questions persist, that no truly satisfying, simple answer has ever emerged, keeps the military cover-up theory at the forefront of the Dyatlov Pass mystery. It forces us to confront the possibility that sometimes the most disturbing truths are the ones deliberately hidden from us. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the world's great unsolved mysteries. The official explanation is simply not good enough, and until more truly definitive information comes out, the idea that the 9 hikers were victims of a secret weapon test, their deaths then swept under the rug by a powerful government, will continue to echo through the mountains, a chilling reminder of the Cold War's hidden dangers and the price of secrecy.